I think one of the things as a political agency that we bring to the table, and I'm sure you guys see this too in this, is just the ability to move fast and bring in those data points to the decision-making process. I mean,
as we all know, the data is not always exactly right, but boy, what a great, thing to fall back on for people who so many people just go with their gut.
By the way, and I don't know how many people know this other than like me and Senator Toomey, but I actually told him on election night to prep his concession speech.
Welcome to the Liberty Spenders podcast. We are Kurt and Kristen Luidhardt, your hosts and co-founders of the Prosper Group, an agency that's helped raise over $500 million and help elect over 100 members of Congress, 15 governors, 15 U.S. senators, and 1 president. And now, in addition to helping political candidates get elected, we're helping your business get elected by answering this question. What if you could exponentially grow your business by tapping into a lucrative and engaged audience that we call Liberty Spenders? Now, we've identified 76.5 million of them, and they're looking to buy from businesses and brands that align with their values. To learn more about that, you can get access to our new best-selling book at libertyspenders.com/free.
Our guest today is Mark Harris, partner at Cold Spark. We've known Mark at least since 2009, I think.
Long time.
I was trying to think, because I believe it was in the Pat Toomey days when he challenged Arlen Specter when we met Mark Harris. And since then, Mark has become a powerhouse in American politics, serving as the founding partner of Cold Spark, a leading political consulting firm based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which he co-founded in 2011. He's a numbers-driven political analyst, self-confessed data nerd, and renowned pollster. Mark's earned a reputation as one of the most sought-after consultants in the country, which I can say from personal experience. Mm-hmm. He recently guided Dave McCormick to a historic victory in his home state of Pennsylvania over Democratic Senator Bob Casey in the 2024 Pennsylvania Senate race.
Woohoo!
He managed Nikki Haley's $80 million super PAC. So
chump change.
Nothing's going on in your life at all.
It was a good cycle last cycle.
Yes, well, welcome.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Those are tough races. Pennsylvania is about as purple can be.
I think there's a lot of people when we got in who kind of thought we were crazy. I mean, Bob Casey had been in elective office for 30 years. His family was, they're like the, political dynasty of the state. So it was a really rewarding. Dave and Dina are phenomenal people, and it was a really rewarding win to get across the finish line by 15,000 votes, and a good reminder that every vote matters in this business.
Well, and it helps. It's not the first time you've probably been thought crazy with certain clients. So at some point, you just get immune to that. It's like, yep, I'm crazy, and here I go again.
Yeah, I mean, if this was easy, anyone would do it. But I know you guys have been through this too. I mean, those are the rewarding races where you get in and you're with a sort of, underdog candidate who just works their tail off and does all the right things, and you can help guide them to get across the finish line.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we all know political consultants who advertise a 95% win rate. And I will say to people who ever ask, I'll say, you never hire a political consultant who wins 99% of their races, because that means they didn't take on any tough ones.
Exactly.
And you want one that win the majority, but they've shown evidence they're willing to take some risks and work on some tough races. And that's definitely top amongst them there in Pennsylvania. And 15,000 votes for a statewide campaign is infinitesimally small. Did I get that right?
0.3%. Yeah.
Yeah. 0.3%. And of course, I love Dave McCormick because I'm a big Ray Dalio fan. And, we did a little bit of work for him, his first Senate race, just a little bit. And that made me so proud.
He's a great guy. He's a great U.S. senator, and he's just already hitting the ground running. But for me to get the opportunity to spend, get to know him over the 2 years, I had been on the outside when you guys were on the inside on the first race, and to get to know him, and it was a pleasure. And he he's just an incredibly hardworking, driven person, and him and Dean are just an amazing dynamic duo, and we could put them anywhere in any part of the state, and they went out and got votes every day, and that's not easy in this business, and it's rare, and it was a pleasure. It was a real pleasure to work on the race together.
Yeah. Well, like I said at the very beginning, we met when you taking on another tough race. Now, this is pre-Cold Spark days, but we met, I think, I know Pat Toomey ran, I think, twice before he won, right?
He was in the House. He won in 98, 2000, and 02. And then in 04, he ran against Specter in the Republican primary. And I was a student at GW in DC. And I got signed up with this long shot congressman from Allentown as I was the youth coordinator, went around and did the campus stuff, and, met so many good people. And I think it was, I'm really proud of that race. I mean, we came up 1% short, but, meeting so many good movement conservatives who, it was really before the Tea Party, before all of this stuff. And I remember Bush coming in and campaigning against us and like going to these party events. No one would talk to us. I mean, it really was a harbinger of things to come, but it was just a great race. And unfortunately we came up a little short, but it was just a great race.
Yeah.
Well, I remember following that too. And it's great when you think back to where you got active, if it was in college or just after, because you are just pure energy, pure idealism, and with no thought for repercussions or how it might matter later, right? Like, the president isn't supporting. Yeah, well, I'm young and I can do this. And but I remember following it, and like you said, a movement conservative and getting really active and just thinking he was so incredible, and watching that race with excitement. And it was wild. I remember thinking like, I didn't understand, right, the politics of politics. I couldn't appreciate where there were allegiances and why, and just thinking, this doesn't make any sense. This can't be, But what a great place to cut your teeth.
I was blessed with also just like, my parents were not political. They were, my dad was a small business owner. My mom stayed home. And they would just, they gave money or volunteered occasionally, but they weren't on the party committee. They never went to events. And so, I didn't have anyone in the 04 race who was like a mentor who could be like, don't do this. You're going to damage your career. You're going to, don't work against the White House. That's a terrible idea. No one was telling me those things. And, it worked out for the best. And I always say, I remember when the race was over, Toomey called me to, thank me for having, helped out. And I remember hanging up and thinking, managing the race that gets him to the U.S. Senate would be my dream job. And so in 2010, when I got a chance to do that, I always say everything else I will have done in my career will be gravy, because I really was blessed. God put me in a situation where I could live out my dream job, and we did it and succeeded. And in another race that, people didn't think we could win. But it was, it was just a huge blessing in my life. And I will never forget that phone call in 2004 from him. And then I will never forget on election night in 2010 when we got across the finish line, which, by the way, and I don't know how many people know this other than like me and Senator Toomey, but I actually told him on election night to prep his concession speech. Because
there's the data nerd who could predict
the first
the outcome,
number. The models were not right when the first number is coming in, and was very much the rurals came in such a. It wasn't nearly as big of a cut as it is now between sort of rural and suburban and urban, but I think that 2010 is where you first started to see those developments, and we did not anticipate the margins out of the rurals that we ended up getting, which helped us get across the finish line. But I did at one point tell him like, oh, you should break out that concession speech.
Well, that reminds me of my first race I ran, which was much smaller, to a state ledge race. And I basically said the same thing to my client. He won by 600 votes, and he was behind the whole night. And I'm thinking, my career is over. This is an incumbent Republican who is supposed to win. We're trying to win the majority, and I'm going to lose this state-led race. And he was cool as a cucumber. Eric Turner, State Representative Eric Turner, cool as a cucumber, because he knew which polls were still out or which precincts were still out. So he was calm. I am sweating. I can remember it still to this day. I can remember we were in his house for the election night thing. He had a big group with him, and I'm thinking, oh my Lord. And then he ended up winning. But that's where we ended up meeting you, is on that race. Not to say that we were the decisive factor between losing in 2004 and 2010, but we'll take some.
Oh, clearly. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But I can also distinctly remember meeting you and Peter Towie, right?
Yep.
I think was the political director.
He was,
on that race, and who also has developed a distinguished career in this.
He's done amazing things.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, though, and maybe you sort of answered it. So, all of us have an origin story about how we got into this weird business, right? And it might be that, you started because you wanted to lead his youth campaign for Pat Toomey, but usually it's something more than that. Chris and I met in the college Republicans and all that. But what got you into this crazy business? What made you want to do it? What sparked your interest?
So it's funny. I kind of wanted for most of my sort of high school career to be a computer programmer. But I have a distinct memory of being in I wanted to go to Carnegie Mellon, obviously here in Pittsburgh. And I have a distinct memory of being in a class and a math class and realizing that my friends who were also sort of on that path were way better at math than I was ever going to be. And I had a distinct thing of maybe this is not my calling. And I was doing speech and debate and did Model UN, and I was the token conservative. So I had grown up in a conservative household and a Republican household. Both my parents were 4 of 4 super voting Republicans. It's just, they weren't involved in the party. They weren't really involved in campaigns, but they definitely, we listened to Rush in the car. They talked politics at the dinner table. I acquired a, strong distaste for, Bill and Hillary Clinton, as a young kid. I liked being the, sort of bomb throwing conservative on the school paper. But I didn't really know it was a career that you could pursue, to be frank. But at the end of high school, I was looking at colleges and got in at GW and, went to the CRs, which this GW CRs are the inner sanctum of crazy, sort of party activists, because you're in the, in DC. And it's funny, Annie Kelly at FP1, we were in the CRs together, and I have a memory of being I'm probably going to be working with this person the rest of my life, right? Many years later, still doing races and stuff together. But, for me, it started with the ideological activism, life, strong defense, things like that economy, lower taxes, anti-gun control, sort of the ideological stuff. And I definitely came in as a movement conservative, whatever you want to call that at the time, and got involved in the Leadership Institute and did a bunch of their stuff. And that was sort of my first real foray into activism. And they had this, I don't know if they still do it, but training program to run youth campaigns, right? For political campaigns.
Youth leadership school. We went to those.
Yeah.
And so, I did that. And, Toomey, I called up Toomey's office, and Matt Blackburn, who's here in Pittsburgh and still a good friend of mine, he picked up the phone, and I'm sure he thought I was crazy because I was this, 20-year-old, 19-year-old kid being I want to run your guys' youth campaign. And they were basically well, we have no budget for it, and we don't really know what that means, but sure. And I literally rode I twice took Greyhounds to college campuses and stuff. So it was it was a life experience. It was really a phenomenal life experience. I met so many people who ended up being longtime sort of friends. I met my key mentor, John Lerner. I met him on that race. He was the general consultant for Toomey in '04. So, Mark Dion, who was the campaign manager. I mean, a lot of the people who, just had a big impact on me. And when that was over, I swore off politics. I said, screw the voters. They're so dumb. Why would they do this? And then, like, I don't know, 3 days later, I was applying for every campaign job I could get my hands on. I had the addiction at that point. And so I went and did actually worked for Herman Cain's Senate race for 3 months in Georgia. And came back and made the fateful decision like 12 months later in the middle of 2005 to run for state house in 2006. They had raised their pay in the middle of the night, the Republican legislature, so that a state house member was making like $90,000 a year full time. And so I was part of a group of people. I think like 35 or 40 members went down in primaries that year. So I won the primary, but I picked a really bad year. And Rick Santorum, it was '06. And I remember knocking on doors and people being like, you're sending our boys to die in the Iraq war. And, it was just like, I'm ready to be in the state house. But, federalism was, yeah. So we lost, which is the best thing that ever happened to me. And I realized I like the behind the scenes part of this. And, from there on, just did a bunch of races, culminating in 2010. And then started the firm in 2011 with my partner, Mike Devaney.
Yeah. I have every once in a while I get a little temptation, like maybe I should run for state rep. And then I think the problem with running for state rep is I'd actually have to do the job of state rep. And I'm not quite...
You'd enjoy the campaign.
Yeah, I'd love the campaign. I'd love meeting with people. I'd love talking to voters. I'd love all that stuff. But then I have to actually go to the General Assembly and deal with all the other politicians. And
yeah.
They're going to annoy me, and I'm going to spout off to the media. And I'm going to have to sit through all this stuff where nothing gets done until the last day of session. Sometimes I joke we ought to just have we should have a 1-day session because only one day does thing get done, and at least Indiana's part-time, right? That's a blessing in Indiana. The longer these legislators are in session, the more trouble they can cause. And so it's also not a very, considering pay. I mean, I think they make $14,000 a year.
It's nothing.
Yeah, PA is a little different as a full-time legislature. I forget. So they rescinded the pay raise after everyone lost, but it's back up now. I don't know what it is, but it's a good, for a lot of these folks, it's the most money they'll ever make, and like it's but Harrisburg is a tough town, and there's no, whatever the press corps is in DC, the press corps in Harrisburg is 1/100th of that. There's like 3 or 4 people now who cover the entirety of Harrisburg. So it's just, it's tough. I always tell my potential clients I'm meeting with, are you sure you really want to do this? But, you guys know there's great people who just feel the calling in their life to serve. And it's an honor to work with those folks and help them win. But I do sometimes feel bad knowing, like, are you sure you know what you're getting into? Because this is, even if you win, it is not a great lifestyle and it's a big sacrifice. But, I'm grateful that good Americans make that sacrifice.
Yes, absolutely agreed. And we have counseled more than a few people away from running. And I don't feel bad about that for 1 second, because they really should go in eyes wide open and really feel, like you said, a calling, really feel, because it's a sacrifice. And sometimes people think, oh, it's so easy. And it's not. It is the toll this takes on people and their families and their, businesses. And it's a big decision.
I give people the same advice I was given when I briefly considered becoming a pastor. I sought advice from my pastor at the time, and he said, well, I'll give you the same advice my pastor gave me. He said, you should only become a pastor if you think God would literally cut you down if you didn't do it, right? The calling needs to be that certain. And I thought, I don't feel quite that way. And I tell politicians the same thing. It's a real calling. You got to want to do it. There are days you'll go to bed thinking, I changed the world today, or I did a lot of good. And there's also a lot of days you'll go to bed thinking, why? What drug was I on when I signed the statement of candidacy? So, but everybody has that same story. I think that like you get passionate and you want to change the world and you get involved in politics. I was inspired in the 1994 Republican Revolution. That got me kind of geeking out as I was the high school student who geeked out about current events, and then ended up involved in it. But you
also shared a love of Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah.
That's the common weave.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have even known who he was. You guys are serious nerds.
I mean, I do. It's probably hard for young people now to it was the only, because there wasn't Twitter, there wasn't podcasts, there wasn't the internet. He was the voice of the conservative world in a way that, doesn't exist. There's no comparable figure anymore.
No.
But it really was. I do remember the day after the 94 election, my dad driving me to school in the morning and listening to Rush take his victory lap on, the election. And, it's 30 years later. And I still remember, that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's amazing how history repeats itself, because I remember, post 94, and then of course, Clinton wins in 96, but Bush won in 2000. And the conclusion for Democrats was we weren't running on unpopular policies. We just don't have enough talk radio shows. And so they like, we're going to
Air America.
We're going to create Air America. And we're going to have, if we just get talk radio, like Republicans have talk radio, we'll win races. Just like this year. It's like, well, it's all Joe Rogan and Theo Von. And if we would have just had Joe Rogan and Theo Von, so we need to have our own podcast. It's just kind of funny. Of course, Republicans do the same thing. But one difference between the two of us is I had to take a statistics class in college. And I remember thinking, I will never use this on a political campaign. And I hate math, and I didn't pay any attention. I eked by with whatever a passing grade was. And then, of course, just a few years later, I'm thinking that was probably the most important class I could have taken for my political science degree. And, you've become a bit of a data nerd. What got you, really, was there, you started in math, I guess, as you were explaining, but what made that such an important thing for you?
So I think it goes back to my state house race, actually. I got a survey done. Actually, John Lerner did the survey for me at the request of, Pat Toomey at the time. And I got this giant printed book. You can see some of them behind me that I have, because I still have to read them on paper. I think a lot of my contemporaries think I'm a dinosaur, but I need the paper and the blue pen. That's the only way I know how to read data sets. And but I had this giant binder, and that got delivered to me, and I just late at night when I couldn't fall asleep after having knocked a bunch of doors and done everything else for the day, I would sit up and sort of flip through the binder, and I asked the pollster to sort of walk me through how to read a survey. And so that was 2006. And so I worked with John in the 2008 cycle, and then again in the 2010 cycle. And he really mentored me on sort of how to read a survey, how a survey is drafted, question order, all that stuff. And so, I really had sort of a mentorship on it from someone who his mentor was a guy named Arthur Finkelstein, who's a sort of a legend on our side of the business. And it really that's really how I learned. And it's something that I always say when I go in, most of my work is general consulting, but the public affairs stuff, etc. I'm going to be one of the few people in this that everything. I'm going to be annoying the pollster all day for additional data. I'm going to read all 1,000 pages of the crosstabs. I really It's the only way I know how to do this business. And it I think has helped me to be successful as things have gone, is because just that dedication to living by that data and immersing myself in the actual data of the races.
Well, it's such a great, secondary lesson because you already mentioned how you started. It's like being willing to learn, right? Probably work for free, right? They said they had no budget, youth campaign,
Yes,
right?
yeah, to me that was
Volunteer.
entirely volunteer.
Yeah. Go to learn, intern, whatever, that's where you can really, and then, if you're blessed enough to get a mentor who will help you, so critical. You take years off the learning curve from someone if they're willing to pour into you like that. And what's amazing too is even though, as we all know, the data is not always exactly right, but boy, what a great, um, thing to fall back on for people who just so many people just go with their gut.
Yeah.
And there's so much you can learn by digging into that and those crosstabs. That has not been a specialty of mine, but I just really respect people that do that because there's so many things you can pick up that you would never notice otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely right. I do think, one of my worries, I mean, this may be a little bit of a tangent, but one of my worries about sort of remote work and sort of the work culture that's developing, I think on all sides, but I see it in the Republican side. I just worry what mentorship opportunities are available to folks because a lot of young people, I'm just like, one, it's an expectation of making a lot of money out of the gate and putting money over sort of career development opportunities. And then, you know, and two, not willing to I lived in rural Massachusetts, North Carolina, like all over the place to do these races. And now when we're out recruiting, it's like, they're like, oh, I only want to do this if I can live in DC or New York or wherever. And it's like, that is not how Republican campaigns works. Like
Right.
I was in Laurel, Mississippi. I was in, all these
Hmm.
places. And, this is not a business you learn in DC. This is not a business that you learn in the books. Like, I just think you have to hands on this and the mentorship opportunities. I couldn't agree more. Like, it is the definitive thing in my career, and I would be nowhere had not John Lerner and others, David Flaherty, others, taken time to really invest in my development, and I owe them tremendous gratitude.
Well, and yeah, and it definitely extends beyond politics. I mean, a lot of our clients, other business owners, entrepreneurs, they're facing this, right? This shift in culture and expectations, not only in what they're willing to do for sweat equity and learning, but also you have to be really intentional. Again, we have a fully remote shop, and it takes a lot more intentionality on the part of leaders and managers to still have that investment in staff so that they can grow and they can learn.
That's impressive. We're like half here in Pittsburgh, half remote, and we struggle with that intentionality. I'd love to hear how you guys tackle that challenge because it is hard to help develop people when they're not physically with you.
Yeah. Well, let's just say it's hard. We feel the same thing. And what I miss the most is when you see people every day, you notice something's up, right? You
Yes.
notice when they come in late 3 days this month or 3 days this week, and they never do that. Or they look like their hair's disheveled or they haven't shaved, like something's not right. And you just don't have those opportunities when they're remote. You don't know. We're not tracking our employees. We're not using keystroke monitoring. So you just don't pick up on some of that stuff. And so you have to ask, and people don't want to tell, right? But yeah, we could do a whole episode on that.
I interned at Americans for Prosperity when it first launched, literally right after it split from Citizens for a Sound Economy. I was like intern 2 or something. And they had a board meeting coming up, and they're supposed to launch a website for but the vendor messed it up. And so I was this 21-year-old kid sitting at a desk, and they were like, "Oh, you're young. You probably know something about websites." And so I worked with them to rebuild the site, the second version of the AFP site, and pulling full 4 all-nighters. Had I been remote, had I not physically been in the office, that opportunity never would have happened. And I just, I do I'm sure life will go on, but it is, I'm always trying to think of how to create those sort of opportunities for people.
Hey, business owners, did you know there's 76.5 million faith-based and conservative consumers that are looking to support brands that align with their values?
That's a $5 trillion opportunity, and if you're not tapping into it, you're leaving money on the table. Our new book, Liberty Spenders, is your ultimate guide to reaching this influential audience using conviction-driven marketing.
That's right. We break down real-world strategies that successful brands are using right now to connect with this audience authentically, build trust, and drive long-term business growth.
So if you're truly serious about standing out in today's crowded market, grab your copy today on Amazon or visit libertyspenders.com. And don't miss out on this revolutionary strategy called conviction-driven marketing.
Well, getting the business right is so important. And I think this is a really tough business. We are a merit-based business in general. There are times I think sometimes like there's a lot of people who get hired over and over again just because they know the right people. But you've got a record, right? Everybody knows. Okay, what was the last campaign you ran? You can't hide. And so to have started a business in 2011 and here it is 2025, so you're getting awfully close to 15 years and still be grabbing some of the best clients in the business. What do you think keeps people coming back and wanting to work with you guys?
So we have 4 core values, and I really think they're super important to us and to help us stand out in the marketplace. And the first and most important of that is ethical decision making. And as you guys know, and I know you guys operate this way too, there is a lot of people in our line of work who don't make the right ethical decisions. And I've always made the view that like things will play out in the long term and we'll leave money on the table in the short term. But like, we're going to be transparent with our clients. We're going to be honest with our clients. And I just always, and I know you guys, see it the same way. That's the best advice I'd give anyone getting into this business is you can sell, you're going to win races and be hot. You're going to lose races and be cold. But if you get the reputation of being a bad person to deal with and an unethical person to deal with, no amount of winning can like undo that. And so I think that's one of it. One part of it. 2 is just, being not a DC firm like you guys, like none of the committees, we were never really in a position where the committees were handing us work or other things. And in fact, usually the opposite.
Right. Yeah.
But, I just felt like living with real people, the people we go to church with, I coach my kids, baseball team with that they're real voters in a way that you get outside the groupthink of DC. And I really think that makes a big difference. And lastly, just being all in for our clients, right? Like I always, like the other day I was with a client and I was doing body man type stuff because that's what they needed at that moment, right? And like I don't care whether you're our most junior person who just joined or if you're a partner, like whatever the client needs, like you got to set up a, rope and stanchion, you got to hang banners, whatever it is, like we got to be all in and there's nothing that we do. There's no one on the team that's like too big to do anything. And I think that those are some really important things that have helped us stand out.
Yeah, I'll tell you, being from outside DC, I have a dream that one day a committee will call me and say, I've got a client for you. It's not happened. It's been 20 years. We've been doing this 18 years now, technically. Maybe by year 20, I'll get that phone call. I know other people get that call. I haven't gotten that call yet. So we're working on it. We really try to be nice to those committee people. And one day, I don't know, the magic will happen. But if you're like me, you've never gotten one of those calls, or maybe it's rare. And maybe it is the getting outside of DC thing. I don't do the bar tour. I've also got a now almost 3-year-old and almost 5-year-old. So I also go into DC for a week to go do the tour. Doesn't sound as fun as it used to.
Don't lie. That never sounded fun.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I've never been a drinker, I guess.
It's a tough, I always say like, to our junior level folks, it's hard because so much of this business is relationships, right? And so, playing golf, going at dinners, lunches, coffees, like, and I have to work with some of our more junior folks on like, you have to develop relationships. And that mean, and I feel like, I'm going to feel like the old guy saying this, but, sometimes I feel like the younger folks have a more 9 to 5 mentality about work, which maybe more health. Let me be clear, maybe like healthier and better for their soul. But and I'm just like, look, if we're going to sell this client, like you have got to go and spend time with them, not necessarily drinking, but you got to spend time with them and build a relationship. And, we don't sell work in a conference room or because we have a good pitch deck. Right.
Well, especially if you're trying to be a general consultant where you're guiding strategy, for us, I think it's a little bit easier because a lot of, the majority of what we do, I mean, it's very, rinse and repeat. And I think, anybody at that level, those relationships breed trust and that they need that. You have to have a trust and rapport with someone because of the role that you're going to be playing. And so I definitely agree. It's important in any business, when you have trust and you have that rapport, by the way, you also have a better working relationship. You can ride highs and lows when you make mistakes. You have some of that bonding and rapport that can help you, go through that or have those difficult or awkward conversations because you've built up some trust. So it's such a key thing. I couldn't agree with you more.
You're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things I work with our new account people on is like really seeing this relationship in your head as sort of a bank account. And when you get wins and when you do these things, you spend time with them, you're putting money in that bank account because you guys know this. I mean, we work hard to eliminate mistakes, but we're humans and there's going to be typos in emails. There's going to be mistakes that happen. And if you're constantly running at a zero balance, you're going to lose the client. And you really have to invest in building that up. And that has to be a conscious account management strategy from day one.
Well, I wanted to circle back a little bit on McCormick some because it's such a big deal in 2024. And I thought I'm kind of curious, 15,000 person win, right? 15,000 vote win. That means there's probably a couple of things that you did in that race or he did during that race that you think were decisive. Like had he not done that, we'd have fallen short, or here's a decision we made that we think led there. And I love the behind the scenes stuff. So what would you say as you look back? What are the decisions you look back and you think, yep, I'm glad we did that one. That was a tough one, but it was the right choice.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think one of them is something that Dave pushed very early on, which I frankly was skeptical about, but he was right. And that was a substantial investment in voter registration and vote by mail. So we worked 2 years out, basically, with outside, to create structures for the Republican Party and others and targets to go out. And, when we, at the start of the cycle, the Democratic advantage was like 400,000 votes. It ended up down at, 200 or 180,000 now. So like we really, that I think was a big part of it. And vote by mail, we moved it 20, we still lost, but it was 20 points better than Dr. Oz did in the mail. And I do think that was a difficult investment. It was controversial. Even, I was skeptical about it. But, I think it was decisive. So that would be one thing. Two was, and I think a lot of people were, at least on the inside, were skeptical of this, is I always had a belief that you couldn't run the usual like Washington, D.C. negative, black and whites against Bob Casey. That voters, they didn't love him, they liked him, but you couldn't, he was in an institution in a way that like you couldn't run the straight negatives until you were something. And so we spent a lot of time, money, and energy on positives and building Dave's brand first, which I know that some of our DC compatriots thought was crazy, that we should have just been going straight at Casey on day one. But I do think that both Casey and Dave ended the campaign, and it's very rare in American politics today. Both of them ended up net positive, like slightly, a point or two, but like I mean, compared to Toomey in 16, where both Toomey and Katie McGinty were significantly underwater. I mean, it's just, it was a different approach. But, my view is you did the gold watch strategy with Casey. It wasn't voters were ever going to hate him. It just needed to be, he might have been the right guy for the last 18 years. He's not the right guy for the next 6, right? And so, and that was, I think, a controversial decision. And then the last one, because I'm a quantitative guy, I've always been skeptical of focus groups. But there were this stubborn 7 or 8% of undecideds left in the middle of October. And this is after, at this point, I don't know, $400 million of spending has happened. So it's not like, people have gotten a lot. And so we wanted to figure out, like, why are these people still undecided? How are they going to make their decision? So we did groups of just undecided voters, which, when it's only 7 or 8% of the population, is not easy. But Gene Ullman and Public Opinion Strategies did a great job. We tracked them down. And, the message out of that group was so loud and clear, which was basically like, I was thinking, maybe we need to go harder on this issue or that issue, or issues. The people who were left undecided, they were not issue voters. They were not like, they didn't have like a checklist of like, okay, you're good on these 3, they're good on these 4, so I'm going to vote for the people who are good on 4. They had one overriding concern. Who is the change candidate? That's it. That was all. It was just, who's going to change things. And so we blew up our entire media plan for the last 3 weeks. We flew Dave like overnight to West Point to shoot a closer ad that was entirely different than our original concept. Brad Todd and his guys at On Message did a phenomenal job. And we put up a whole new flight of ads because of that research. And I do think that pivot was crucial for us to get that last bit of the vote that we needed. And we had to be explicit in, you want change, you got to vote for Dave McCormick. And that really, I think, was pivotal in us getting across the finish line.
Yeah. I feel, to your point, which we kind of circle back almost to this idea that in the end, you need data and you understand what's really happening out there. And so much of campaigns are being run by guts. My favorite joke in politics is, I still remember this from a 2012 campaign, and this rule has proven true every campaign I've ever been on. A lot of these campaigns have these weekly calls with all the consultants, and sometimes they let us, minuscule digital guys who are providing all the money for the campaign actually get on the calls.
Funding the campaign, yeah.
But I remember being on these calls, and the calls always went the same. Pollster went first. Here's what my tracking poll said for the last week. And they'd say something like, we're down 5 points with independent women, which are important demographic for winning. And the media guy would get on and say, well, that must mean we need another 1,000 gross rating points spent on these ads because they haven't seen enough of our stuff. And then a week later we get on and the pollster would say, we're up 5 points. With independent women, and the TV guy would say, well, that must mean that we need another 1,000 gross rating points to spend on the ads because they must be working. And the answer to everything was, we just need to spend more money. And no one's asking the question of why, or to some extent, how many people are in this sample that we're building our entire decision making process behind?
I mean, independent women are probably, depending on the state, but it could be like 25 or 30 people in that subset.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But so it's so right to make sure, and we talk about this with our business clients, and I think is a good opportunity to pivot to that a little bit. Too many of our business clients go jump on and start working with a marketing agency, and they have a great idea, right? Like, this is what we're going to say. This is the ad we're going to do. And it worked for this guy 2 years ago. And no one ever steps back and asks, well, do we know it really works? No one generates any proof. No one does any ad testing. No one does any focus groups. And, at best, a lot of these business clients are simply judging based on, well, we ran this thing and the landing page that the digital version went to, we got, 1,000 prospects and closed 2 of them. Okay. So that's our data point. And, just taking how much money did you save? You might have won because of that focus group. But I mean, you could also argue how much money did you save knowing that that was the one message that actually needed to be said, not
finding that out first.
right.
I think that's one of the great things. I mean, to your point, like trying to bring that discipline into our, we do a bunch of public affairs and corporate work, largely for highly regulated, medical, education, energy, et cetera, who have these, who are dealing with some issue. They want to build a pipeline or a new hospital or, a development or whatever, casino, et cetera. I think one of the things as a political agency that we bring to the table, and I'm sure you guys see this too in this, is just the ability to move fast and bring in those data points to the decision-making process. I mean, I'll never forget this is more than 10 years ago now, one of our first times we worked on the corporate side, and they were like, we need this quick. And I was like, okay. And I was like, so what, like tomorrow? And they laughed and they were like, no, like a month. And I was like, oh,
Exactly.
okay, sure. Like that's not quick, but okay. Happy to work on that timeline. We turn spots around in a day, let alone some of the people we hire who come out of the traditional ad space, I always am telling them like, this is a different world and you really have to adjust to that, the speed of stuff that happens here.
Yeah, we can get a lot done in a very short amount of time.
Yep.
And to Kurt's point, there's, we say this a lot, but there's no second place, and so there's so much riding on this. And so even though Kurt makes the joke about the pollster and the TV guy, that's more about them, wanting to spend more on their ads. But there is a ton of data used, and we're doing all kinds of testing and regular polling, and we're tracking everything because we have to. I mean, we don't have the luxury of time of testing this and then finding out, we have an ultimate deadline. Everything's moving towards that. And so that's one of the benefits that we bring in, that you bring to your clients, is because we're trained in that. Even though, as we discussed, that's not our particular specialty, but we know the importance of it. And so bringing that to bear is critical. And it's interesting. So when you did those, focus groups, I'd love to have you, if you can speak a little more to that, because again, we're advising clients on this when they're trying to change up their messaging and they're saying, I want to go out to this audience. They're a little bit, they get a little bit nervous about what that's like. So maybe you can speak to that in your experience and how that, again, it helped you in this example.
Yeah, I mean, there are three types of, qualitative groups that we did throughout the campaign. In this case, because we were time pressed, it was not ad testing, but we did a substantial amount of research on how to respond to the abortion issue, and that involved real ad testing and multiple different creatives and a scientific environment, and it helped us settle on a direction that I never would have, to Kurt, to your point you've been making this whole time, my gut, and I get paid to a certain extent on my gut on how to handle that issue was 100% wrong, and the data bore out what the right way was, and that's what we adopted. We also did in-person focus groups on that. That's what we did with the undecided voters, because we didn't even, ad testing works when you have like real sort of options. We can choose these 3-4 options. The in-person groups I find are helpful when you're like, you really have a broad brush and you don't even have defined options yet. You just want to learn like why, right? Because I always think focus groups are good for why and how. The survey research is better for the numbers and the who of it, but why and how are they're hard to answer in a quantitative survey. And so the focus groups, when we ask people like, what do you know? What have you been seeing? How do you think about this decision? What words do you use to describe McCormick? What words do you use to describe Casey? And you really get a better feel, for lack of a better term, a 3-dimensional feel for who these undecided voters were. And the truth is, look, I mean, we live this every day, but these are people who are like, they're just worried about paying their mortgage and getting their kids to school, and they consume almost no media. That's the other thing, is like, we found that for the ultra low information voter, we really only had one medium that we could two, including mail, but one broadcast medium, and that was football. They didn't watch the news. They didn't watch any other sports. They watched football, college and NFL. Like I would joke that we would buy, like if there were Pee Wee football on television in Pennsylvania, like we were buying it, because it was the one place that all of our data said we could reach these ultra low voters. Because you guys know, you have about a third of the electorate, and they watch the news. They're very, you can get those people very easily, but and particularly in a presidential election, you really have to reach. And our, the focus groups, and then lastly the online call boards, which are sort of like almost like an old school message board discussion. We also use those, which is helpful when you can't get everyone in a room, right? You can have a larger group and geographically dispersed across the state versus a traditional focus group where you're sort of geographically limited.
That's super helpful.
Yeah. Well, before we come to an end, I wanted to do a little bit of, let's talk about the future of, every campaign. I feel like I go in thinking, oh, this is what's going to happen. This is why I've stopped giving predictions. And people go, oh, you're the political expert. Tell me what's going to happen. And I say, well, because I'm the expert, I'm going to tell you I have no clue.
So true.
But it does feel like, things change every cycle. I think coming out of 2024, there was some, quick coverage about the podcast election, which of course I'm a big fan of that concept because I've been telling people about that for a year or two, thinking we should do more of that. So there's that. There's also, sort of how voters change their preferences, particularly minority voters with Trump. But what would you say are the lessons perhaps from 2024, or maybe some things that let's make some wild predictions, some hot takes. If we get them wrong, we'll pretend we never said them. But what do you think? What would you say for the next couple of years? What would you be looking at, or what are some big things you're seeing change?
It is, and I'm doing the Virginia governor's race this cycle, and I'm seeing this in real time. We are heading to a very much racially depolarizing electorate, which frankly for America, I think is a great thing, right? And I think, Republicans can and will win historic percentages of African Americans and Hispanics and Asians. I think Asians are going to, become a sort of not base Republican, but I do think we're a cycle or so away from Asians being a majority Republican voting subgroup. I think Hispanics are going to be a 50-50 group. And I really believe, because if you look, the big thing in the African American community is if you look at the age breakouts, 65 plus is like a 95-5 Democratic constituency. Under 30 is like a 70-30 constituency. So even if we should compete for every vote, we should go out and convert even more folks. But just demographics of essentially the 65 plus demos, aging out, passing on, unfortunately. It's a huge problem for the Democratic Party, because it is, even if no one else is sort of converted to being a Republican, just the transition of time is going to dramatically reduce their African American margins, which for Democrats is a sort of existential problem. And, but for Republicans, we got to go and compete in the cities. We got to go win these votes. We cannot be complacent. And I think that's one of the great things that Trump brought to the table. So you hit on it, but I would agree on one. Two is non-traditional media. We bought from McCormick a ton of podcasts, a ton of audio, and also going back to and I felt like I was going back in time. We bought a lot of terrestrial radio, which I have not bought in a long time, but terrestrial rural radio was an phenomenal medium for us. It was affordable. We could reach a bunch of new folks. It hit the people we needed to hit. And so I haven't bought this much terrestrial radio in probably 8 to 10 years. And, that was surprising to me. I bought a lot less cable. Cable was a much less effective medium for us. We dropped it a lot. And I think the other thing is, you guys live this every day. And this is on the Republican side more closely felt, but it's on the Democrat side too. The days of just printing money online are over. And that is going to change the ecosystem. And, I remember, I'm sure you guys too, back in the day, it's state, you could have a congressional member raise a ton of money on one text. Those days are over. And, need great firms like yours to continue. It's important work, right? But we can't rely on it nearly as much as we used to be able to. And we need good firms like yourself doing more and expanding the pool, but it's a tough world out there online.
Yeah. Now that's a topic we could do 30 minutes on.
Yes.
We ended up doing Ted Cruz. We did Ted Cruz for the 2024 year. And Ted raised nearly twice as much online as his closest Senate competitor. And where I give him and his team credit, ourselves included, is the disease we have in the party is that we're all fishing from the same pond, and we're addicted to these commission-based email revenue share arrangements. Candidates love it because there's no, quote, risk. But that also means we're not expanding the pool of donors. And Cruz's people were very willing to do it. And where we found we got a lot of them was from his media appearances. But what was interesting about it, and this will be a little tidbit for anybody listening here. What was interesting about it wasn't just that he got on media. There was a giant delta between how much he raised based on how frequently he mentioned his domain. And it was interesting. I mean,
I say it to clients all the time. They never listen when I do that.
Because you just, like, if it probably didn't feel good, right? Yeah. Like, it's got to be a difficult thing to do, but it's real.
Somebody actually wrote an article about it about Cruz, because he got on a media appearance. I think he got away with saying it 6 times. I'm not sure which media appearance it was, but Ted got really good at it. And the amount of time he said tedcruz.org was a big difference. And it led to a nice pipeline of new donors, because Ted Cruz has been raising money online since 2010. How many email lists can we hit in which Ted doesn't already have those donors on his list? And so that was a big X factor, plus their willingness to go after some different platforms. We spent pretty heavily on X, which a lot of campaigns weren't, and it was a losing proposition, but it got us new donors. And so we did an analysis at one point, because we were getting some pressure from the campaign, like, hey, we can't, particularly as election day close, we need every penny. I don't want to lose money there. But, the donors coming in from those platforms were new. And so cutting that pipeline off would have meant, we would be losing opportunity to bring in new donors. But
you'll appreciate one of your competitors, I won't say who, but they I know that after the election there was an audit of the new donors they had brought in through their email prospecting and stuff like that. And it was like 70% not new donors and only 30% new donors, right, from their prospecting program. And it's a big ecosystem problem we have, for sure.
It's an awful one.
It's not just, I'm very proud of the work we do and the intention we take to do these things, and to be blessed with clients who will heed that advice and be willing to invest. Because if you're not, and we can't do our jobs, to the best of our ability, if you're not willing to put some investment in. But I do think when you said, like, things have to change, we have to recognize, I guess, that shift and be willing to put in the work to get those things done, and not be so reliant on, because the whole model shifted, right? It's like, it's just all no risk and high commission. And it's just, well, what do you think is going to happen if you do that? And also your respect of the donor, you're berating the same donors, and you're ruining, going back to relationships. I mean, you're just ruining the feelings that they have.
I was involved in I'm on the board of the American Association of Political Consultants. I was involved in like the ethics stuff we put out around digital fundraising, because I do think that that's really important. And I do think that, like, the right approach, like on McCormick, we basically, when we benchmarked, we missed the gross number based on what some of the more traditional vendors told us we should raise gross based on previous cycle data. We missed by about $8 million, but we hit the net number. So that means in previous cycles, we would have, in theory, raised about $8 million more dollars gross, but all of it was literally just going into the list and, to the vendor ecosphere, which, is great for vendors, but, I'm just a big proponent of net first on these things. And like, you have to think that through, because there's just the old days systems are just, they're not going to work anymore. And maybe they weren't even the best thing at the time, but they were what they were. So.
Yeah, well, that's an important distinction. I could go on and on about that one too, and I don't want to turn this into a podcast about Kurt Luidhardt's pet peeves of online fundraising.
I'd listen to that podcast.
Yeah. As I get older and as we start doing more commercial work, I start feeling less pressure to not upset people, and that's probably dangerous. But yeah, we should absolutely do it, because there was a lot of interesting learnings from Cruise, and I give the campaign leadership a lot of credit.
Yes.
Jeff Rose, speaking of somebody who's very data oriented, and he would really dig into our stuff and then challenge me everywhere. And I would, after kind of huffing about it privately, I would go try to find his answers, and found a lot of really interesting things that we were able to do to improve how TED was operating. And a lot of them were things that, boy, these are problems with the way the party operates, and it's not going to get solved until somebody from above says, we got to all stop doing this. We got to stop texting the same people 35 times a day. That being said, I want to do a quick ending here. We love to do our lightning round and ask some quick 3 questions. All right, so we're going to try. There's no buzzer. Maybe I should get one. There's no buzzer, but we're going to try 90 seconds each. One on what legacy would you like to leave behind at Cold Spark?
It's a great question. I think there's 2 answers to this. One is, I really would like to do a winning presidential. It really is like the Super Bowl of our industry, and I've done 2 losing ones. And so, would love, I feel like that's, a real legacy of something that goes down in the history books I'd love to be a part of. And 2 is just, a group of people who are doing good work the right way. And we may not be the biggest, but just, we have a reputation of being the best and the most ethical and, the hardest working for our clients. And I really I take that reputation very seriously, and hope that, we can leave that as a legacy.
Yeah, well, I hope so too. There's a very few people who get to do a winning presidential campaign.
Yeah, I know, it's rare.
And being able to do it though, it's awesome, Also, we love to give people a chance to talk about a topic that's off topic, right? What's something that's got your attention lately? Maybe it's a hobby, sports team, good book you've read that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I really have. It's a podcast, but the Rest is History podcast is like my obsession. It has been for like 2 years now, but I religiously listen to those guys, and they're always recommending books. So then I feel like it also has really built out the books I'm reading. But it's basically a podcast that covers all of history. It's 2 British guys that are very funny and insightful. And they, right now they're going through the lead up to 1066 and the Norman invasion. And anyways, yeah, the Rest is History podcast is my, that's probably my thing that I'm really passionate about right now outside of politics and kids. I'm also in my first season coaching my son's baseball team. So that is a life experience too.
Oh, I can only imagine.
That's a good recovery, because after all this discussion of math, to mention a history podcast as your other passion, you're really cementing your brand as a super nerd.
I do my best.
And also somebody that, Kurt should talk to more often.
Yes.
That's totally his jam.
I will probably now try to find this podcast. I love some good history. And then we wanted to give you a last opportunity to do just some gratuitous promotion. So 90 seconds for somebody listening who's maybe a business owner or a potential political candidate. Why would they work with Mark Harris and Cold Spark?
Yeah, thank you. So we're a 42-person firm that is focused on helping people solve their political related problems. So it could be running for office, it could be building a pipeline, it could be opening a hospital or advocating. I mean, we do a lot of work right now in the pro-Israel space, advocating for, America's close ally in the Middle East. So, we are a full service shop and we work really hard for our clients to do the best work and bring sort of the expertise of politics to the corporate and advocacy space as well. And so, good people doing good work and working with good folks like you guys too. So it's not every day is 100% fun, but every day is a new adventure. And, I love being part of the team here and getting to see it grow from just my partner and I, 2 folks, to, now 42 people all across the country. It's been a phenomenal ride and a, tremendous blessing from God.
It's an amazing accomplishment, Mark, and you absolutely deserve to feel that pride. It's an amazing thing, not only just having the success on the races, but building a team and building a company. I know we didn't spend time talking about business lessons, but there's a lot there. And getting to that size, I mean, it really takes a higher level of leadership. And so we really congratulate you on it. And we think very highly of you. So I'm really glad you were able to come and join us today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for joining. To get in touch with Mark, anybody out there, hit him up at coldspark.com.
Yes. So thank you again. And if you are listening, thank you for your time. We know how valuable it is. If you found value in this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything in the future. And again, you can check out more about us at libertyspenders.com/free. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Liberty Spenders podcast. If you're a business owner, we hope today's conversation gave you valuable insights on how to grow your business.
If you enjoyed the show, do us a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. It really helps us reach more entrepreneurs and leaders like you who are ready to make an impact.
And write something flattering, because I read them all. Don't forget to grab your copy of Liberty Spenders too, available now on Amazon and at libertyspenders.com. It's packed with proven strategies to help you reach the 76.5 million consumers who are looking for brands that share their values.
We'll see you next time as we continue exploring how to grow your business with purpose and conviction.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode and the one after that.